What if I told you that a piece of music could actually build a massive, like 10,000 square foot stone cathedral right inside your living room?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then it just completely locks you inside it.
That's a pretty intense visual.
Right. But imagine just putting your headphones on, you press play, and suddenly the physical space around you just feels entirely different. Like the
Mm-hmm.
walls feel thicker,
Mm-hmm.
the ceiling vaults way up into the shadows. You aren't just, listening to a melody anymore. You're physically inhabiting a completely different environment.
It is a remarkable trick of human perception, honestly. Because audio, when it's engineered with really specific spatial and psychological triggers, it can completely override your visual reality.
It really can.
I mean, you haven't moved an inch from your couch, right? Yet your brain absolutely insists that you are sitting in this ancient cavernous hall.
And that phenomenon right there is at the very heart of our deep dive today. So we are exploring this really extraordinary 2 hour and 38-minute audio experience. It's called Monastic Mourning, The Architecture of Grief in Sustained Minor.
A very light and breezy title.
Oh, exactly. Very pop radio. But our mission today is to understand how this specific piece uses a genre called neoclassical darkwave to basically turn sound into a habitable structure.
Right.
And in doing so, it attempts to fundamentally rewrite how you and I process the emotion of grief. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, let's get into it.
If we're looking at the structural blueprints of a sonic building, we need to understand the raw materials first. So what exactly is neoclassical darkwave?
Well, to understand the darkwave element, we first really have to look at the neoclassical foundation.
Okay.
Because the primary material used in this composition is the Western classical tradition. The architects of this album, they kept the rigorous, mathematical structures of classical music completely intact.
So no breaking the rules there.
Yeah. No, not at all. We are dealing with strict counterpoint, the heavy gravitas of minor keys, and this really dense Baroque harmonic logic.
Wait, let's pause on that for just a second because those are some pretty dense terms.
Fair enough, yeah.
When I think of Baroque harmonic logic or strict counterpoint, I picture something very rigid, almost like multiple independent melodies locking together like actual masonry.
That is actually a very accurate way to visualize it. I mean, counterpoint basically involves multiple melodic lines playing at the exact same time, but they are entirely independent of one another.
Okay, so it's not just a lead and some background chord.
Exactly. Instead of a single singer with, a backing band, you have 3 or 4 voices that weave around each other. And they're mathematically designed to never step on each other's toes.
Wow.
They form these literal load-bearing walls of sound. It gives the music a feeling of immense stability and order. It knows exactly how to ache without just collapsing under its own weight.
Okay, so traditional neoclassical music feels like this pristine, well-lit historical building. You walk in, the acoustics are perfectly balanced, everything is perfectly symmetrical.
Right, very clean.
And the whole space is designed to evoke clarity and reverence.
Yes.
But then we introduce the darkwave element into the mix. And reading through our sources, the best analogy I could really come up with is imagine that pristine, perfectly ordered building, right?
I'm picturing it.
But suddenly, this low, incredibly heavy fog just starts rolling in under the cathedral doors.
What's fascinating here is that the fog doesn't actually tear the building down.
Right.
The stone pillars of that classical counterpoint, they're still holding the roof up. The vaulted ceilings are still fully intact.
Yes. But the fog inhabits the space. It entirely changes the emotional weather system inside that building.
It really does.
It obscures all those clean lines and just electrifies the silence between the notes. But my question is, why obscure those clean lines to begin with? If you have this beautifully constructed classical foundation, why introduce the fog at all?
So traditional classical music usually seeks some kind of resolution. It wants to guide you through a dark movement and eventually bring you out into the light.
Give me that satisfying ending.
Exactly. Darkwave, however, leans aggressively into ambiguity. It embraces shadow and, deep interiority. It isn't trying to offer you a clean resolution at all.
Not even a little bit.
No. It asks a much more difficult question, which is, what happens after the requiem ends, the final chord is struck, and nobody leaves the room?
You just sit there. You just sit in the heavy air of what just happened.
Yeah. Monastic mourning lives entirely in that suspended, lingering moment. The air is still vibrating. It isn't a series of, distinct musical movements designed to entertain a passive audience.
It's an environment.
Yes, it's an environment you have to step into and occupy.
So if the genre provides the blueprint, the instruments themselves are the physical bricks and mortar here. The sources detail the exact acoustic elements used in the production, and it is just a fascinating blend. We have a chamber string ensemble featuring violins, violas, cellos, and double bass.
A really rich lineup.
Right. And they are playing with sustained legato phrasing, so these long, connected, unbroken notes that feel almost like deep, exhausted exhalations.
And they also utilize tremolo, right? That rapid back and forth bowing that creates a really shivering, anxious texture.
Yeah, exactly. And grounding all of this is a very, very low register piano.
And that acoustic foundation, it provides the raw biological element of the soundscape. You can hear the friction of the wood, the scrape of the horsehair bows, the literal physical breath required by the musicians to maintain those long phrases.
It feels deeply human.
It does. But then, threaded through all those organic sounds are these deep drones and warm, slightly detuned analog synthesizers.
And here's where I really have to admit, I was a little confused when I first read the production notes.
Oh yeah, how so?
Well, I just don't understand why a composer would take a gorgeously recorded, pristine cello and deliberately blur it with a detuned electronic drone. I mean, it feels almost like sabotage, you know?
I get that. But from a purely acoustic standpoint, detuning analog synthesizers creates a physical phenomenon called beating.
Beating.
Yeah. When two frequencies are just slightly out of phase with one another, they clash, and it creates this slow, pulsating wobble in the sound wave.
Oh, weird.
And human biology reacts to that wobble instinctively. We register it as a wavering voice or like an unsettled heart rate.
Wow, okay.
It triggers a subtle subconscious feeling of melancholy or unease. Furthermore, these synths aren't even playing the main melody. The sources actually compare them to incense that never quite dissipates.
That is such a cool image.
Right, they just haunt the edges of the room, blurring the line between the acoustic wood and the synthetic circuitry.
Okay, I totally get the acoustic effect now. But philosophically, why force these two completely different worlds to occupy the same exact space?
Because that ambiguity is the central emotional thesis of the record. The music is arguing that human grief is a hybrid experience.
How so?
Well, on one hand, grief is intensely biological. It physically hurts your chest, it alters your sleep patterns. It is an ancient, raw feeling as old as humanity itself. And that is represented by the organic strings.
Right, but we don't just feel grief, we manage it.
Exactly. We construct highly mechanical realities to survive it. We build elaborate social rituals. We develop psychological coping mechanisms. We compartmentalize our days just to keep functioning.
So grief is sacred, but it's also a constructed mechanical process of survival.
Yes. The seamless fusion of the breathing acoustic strings and the rigid synthetic drones mirrors that dual nature perfectly.
You eventually stop asking which part of the sound is the wooden cello and which part is the machine, because they have basically become the same entity.
They really have.
So the biological pain and the constructed coping mechanism fuse into one structure. But if the strings and the synths are the bricks, we really need to talk about where this building is actually located.
Yes, the space itself.
We have to look at the physical space the sound occupies, which relies heavily, heavily on the engineering of the reverb.
The architecture of the echoes. The producers chose to use massive cathedral-style reverb with decay tails lasting anywhere from 6 to 10 seconds.
Okay, and I have to push back on that from a purely listening perspective. A 10-second echo sounds like an absolute engineering nightmare.
It sounds chaotic.
Yeah. If I hold the sustain pedal down on my piano in my living room for 10 seconds while playing a melody, the notes just bleed together into a muddy, dissonant wall of noise. How does this not just collapse into unlistenable white noise?
Well, it absolutely would collapse if they were playing at a standard pop music tempo. This is where the pacing becomes structural rather than just a stylistic choice.
Oh, okay.
The tempo is locked into a highly deliberate 50 to 70 beats per minute range. Because the tempo is so incredibly slow, there are massive gaps of silence left between the musical phrases.
So the arrangement literally leaves room for the echo to breathe.
Exactly. The decay tail actually becomes part of the composition. With a 10-second echo, you aren't simply hearing the notes being played in the present moment. You are forced to listen to what the music leaves behind.
Wow.
Every single note is allowed to linger long enough to become a memory before the next phrase even begins.
It forces you to sit with the consequence of the sound. The space between the notes carries just as much psychological weight as the strings themselves.
Yeah, the silence is heavy.
And that sluggish 50 to 70 beats per minute tempo, It doesn't drift, and it certainly doesn't groove. It feels like it processes.
It resembles a solemn ceremonial march.
Yeah, it sounds like heavy footsteps echoing in a stone cloister. And the percussion is incredibly sparse. You just hear these distant, low drums or timpani that act like a slow, resting heartbeat.
Just a pulse, really.
Right. And when you combine that tempo with the massive reverb and the somber strings, it completely changes the relationship between the musician and the listener.
In what way?
Well, we normally think of music as a performance, right? An artist gets on a stage, plays for an audience, and tries to elicit a reaction. But listening to Monastic Morning, it doesn't feel like these musicians are performing for me at all.
How would you characterize their playing then?
It feels like they are confessing. They circle these minor chord progressions over and over again, and it just stops feeling like a piece of entertainment.
It becomes something else entirely.
Yeah, it feels like a private ritualistic devotion that we just happen to be witnessing from like the back row of the church.
That perfectly captures the monastic imagery the album is named after. I think modern society often misinterprets monastic life. We imagine monks retreating into a monastery simply to escape the noise of the real world.
Sure, like a quiet vacation.
Right. But historically, monasticism is not about escape at all. It is about sustained, unbroken attention. Repetition is utilized as a grueling form of devotion.
The sorrow isn't thrashing around or throwing a tantrum. The strict Baroque discipline of the music gives the emotion a very specific posture. The source material uses a phrase I found incredibly striking. It said, "The sorrow stands upright."
It refuses spectacle. It isn't asking for your pity, and it isn't trying to manipulate you into crying. It is simply demanding your absolute presence.
Which is a remarkably intimidating thing to demand from a listener today. I mean, I will be the first to admit, I get anxious if a video on my social media feed is longer than 45 seconds.
We all do. We're trained for it.
We are so conditioned to consume 3-minute pop songs that give us a quick hit of an emotion, resolve the tension, and let us go about our day. But because the sonic cathedral is so vast and the echoes last for 10 seconds, you simply cannot take a quick 3-minute tourist's walkthrough.
No, the physical scale of the audio file itself forces a different kind of engagement. The duration is a critical component of the architecture.
And the full mix clocks in at 2 hours, 38 minutes, and 43 seconds. It is not an album of distinct, catchy tracks that you can shuffle on a playlist.
Definitely not.
Our sources emphasize that it is a single, continuous environment meant to be inhabited entirely, not consumed in fragments. So how is a modern listener, with our fractured attention spans, supposed to survive nearly 3 hours of sustained minor chords?
The psychology behind long-duration or drone music is actually fascinating. For the first 20 minutes or so, your brain will likely fight it.
Oh, I'm sure it would.
You will wait for a dramatic beat drop or a chorus or a shift in the melody. But when you are exposed to such a slow, unchanging tempo for an extended period, your brain eventually just gives up trying to predict what comes next.
It surrenders.
Exactly. You lose track of structural markers.
Because anticipation dies.
And when anticipation dies, sheer presence takes over. Time actually begins to loosen its grip on your perception.
That's wild.
The music starts as an environment around you, but after an hour, it becomes entirely internal. You aren't waiting for the song to end anymore. You're just existing inside the space it has carved out.
That makes total sense because the narrative of the album isn't linear. It doesn't tell a story where A happens, which causes B, leading to some triumphant hero's resolution.
Right.
The narrative is spatial. Moving through this 2.5-hour composition is like literally walking through different wings of a massive monastic complex.
What does that architectural walk feel like as the hours progress, based on the breakdowns?
Well, according to the sources, the rooms you enter change dramatically in texture. So some chambers are incredibly austere. You walk in and it feels nearly empty. There's just a single exposed cello line echoing under a vast, dark ceiling.
Very isolated.
You feel very small and isolated, but as you keep moving, you drift into other chambers that are thick with harmonic layering. The synths swell, and you start to hear these sparse, distant, wordless choral voices. Yeah, it feels like you've stumbled into a hidden chapel filled with unspoken names. And there are no cinematic peaks or sudden key changes to snap you out of it. It's just a slow, deliberate deepening. Like walking endlessly down a set of stone stairs into the earth, but never quite hitting the bottom floor.
You are just descending deeper into the foundation.
Exactly. So we have this colossal, nearly 3-hour neoclassical dark wave cathedral We have acoustic strings bleeding into analog drones. We have 10-second echoes and a resting heartbeat tempo.
A lot of heavy elements.
Why go through all this effort? So what does this all mean? This brings us to the ultimate purpose of this deep dive, which is the album's incredibly radical philosophy on how you and I are supposed to process loss.
It directly challenges the core tenets of modern psychology's approach to grief.
It fundamentally rejects them. I mean, modern culture treats grief as an explosive, temporary emotion.
Like an illness.
Exactly. It's treated like an illness that you need to cure so you can get back to normal as quickly as possible.
Right.
But this music treats grief as a permanent architecture. It has load-bearing walls. It has long corridors. It has rooms you're going to return to over and over again for the rest of your life.
And each time you return to that room, you might notice a shadow in the corner or an echo that you completely missed the last time you were there.
Yeah. If we think about the music itself, we mentioned earlier that it relies on sustained minor tonalities.
Yes.
Those minor chords aren't just there to sound spooky or sad.
No, in traditional music theory, a minor chord creates tension that demands to be resolved into a major chord. By sustaining the minor key and refusing to resolve it, the music creates a physical foundation holding the structure in place.
It keeps you oriented in the tension.
Exactly. It keeps you there while the emotional ground subtly shifts beneath your feet.
And there is a profound defiance in that view of grief, especially when you contrast it with how society functions today. We live in a world that is absolutely obsessed with closure.
Oh, completely obsessed.
We demand a neat transformation arc for everything. The expectation is that you suffer a loss, you go to therapy, you do the work, you heal, and you emerge as this stronger, better person on the other side.
Find your closure or time heals all wounds.
But monastic mourning absolutely refuses to play along with that modern demand. It does not want to heal you. It does not offer you a map to guide you out of the darkness and back into the sunlight.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the music is building a dedicated space where your grief is allowed to simply exist without being corrected.
Yes.
It isn't trying to simplify the complexity of your loss into a neat little life lesson.
And that was the massive aha moment for me reading through these sources. Initially, I thought, well, if this album locks you in the dark for 3 hours and refuses to let you out, isn't that just hopeless despair?
It sounds like it would be.
Right. But the sources articulate the philosophy so beautifully. It's not despair. And it's not even active, weeping mourning. It is a dignified coexistence with weight.
Dignified coexistence. That phrase perfectly captures the monastic element we discussed earlier.
It really does.
It recognizes a fundamental truth, that modern society constantly tries to ignore some frequencies, much like some losses in our lives simply do not resolve.
And they do not resolve because they aren't meant to resolve.
Exactly.
They are meant to resonate.
They are meant to echo in the cathedral forever. The architecture gives the pain a place to live so that it doesn't have to consume the rest of your life, but it also doesn't demand that you erase it.
To pull all of these blueprints together, what we've seen today is how monastic mourning uses the strict mathematical discipline of classical counterpoint and the atmospheric fog of dark wave to achieve something genuinely magical.
Truly.
By fusing the biological breath of chamber strings with the mechanical drone of analog synths, slowing the tempo to a ritualistic crawl, and utilizing massive cathedral reverb, it physically manifests a 2-hour and 38-minute world.
It is a remarkable achievement in both sound design and emotional philosophy.
It rejects the exhausting modern pressure to just get over our pain. Instead, it hands us the acoustic blueprints to build a permanent, dignified structure in our own minds where our heaviest emotions are allowed to stand upright.
But before we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you listening to this right now with a final thought to mull over.
Oh, please do.
We've talked extensively about the massive, invisible stone cathedral this music constructs in your mind, but consider the actual physical space you are occupying at this very moment.
Okay.
Whether you are crammed onto a noisy subway car, or lying in a small familiar bedroom, or walking through a wide-open park, how does that real-world geometry interact with the music's grief architecture?
Oh, that's interesting.
Do the cramped walls of your bedroom fight against the vaulted stone ceilings of the soundscape? Or do those two spaces somehow bleed together, creating an entirely new, deeply personal room that belongs only to you?
That is a fascinating question to carry with you. I highly encourage you to carve out some serious time, put on your absolute best pair of headphones, and step inside this architecture for yourself. See what kind of room it builds around you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the blueprint of sound. We'll catch you next time.